Hey ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Unit 9, Notes 5-2. So today we're going to be talking about dividing, not dividing monomials, that should be dividing rational expressions. I'm just going to label that RE, dividing rational expressions. And so when we do that today, you're going to have to factor. So just like when you're multiplying rational expressions, it's best to factor first and then do your dividing. So go ahead and pause the video and take the time to write that down, and let's take a look at the rest of this. So let's take a look at this one. Now, this one doesn't look like we need to do factoring, but we actually do. We have to take out the GCF. So if I look at 2b plus 2, I can take a GCF out of each of those terms. So I have b plus 4 on top, and then I can take a 2 out of each term on the bottom. And when I divide a 2 from each term, I'm left with b plus 1. Now, when you're dividing, remember that means you need to flip the second fraction. So as I'm flipping that second fraction, I'm going to factor it. So first of all, this b plus 1 is on the bottom, so it's going to come up top. Next, I have 3b plus 12 on the top. That's going to go down to the bottom. Now what I noticed is that both of those terms are divisible by 3. So I'm going to take out a 3 from each, and then I'm left with b plus 4. So I'm going to write what I have as one big multiplication problem. So I have b plus 4 times b plus 1 on top, and on the bottom I'm going to multiply 2 times 3, which is 6. And then I have b plus 1, b plus 4. So now I want to cancel out those factors that are overlapping. Those cancel, and those cancel. So everything cancels out on top, and I'm just left with 1. And on the bottom, I'm left with 6. Before we forget, let's go ahead and calculate that excluded value. So we're going to set b plus 1 equal to 0, and we're also going to set b plus 4 equal to 0. Remember, we're taking it from this version. 6 is never going to equal 0, so we don't have to worry about. So we get that b is equal to negative 1 here, and b is equal to negative 4 here. So our excluded values are that b cannot be negative 1 or negative 4. Let's take a look at number 2. So again, I want to take out the greatest common factor out of some of those. So I can take a 6 out of the first term, and I'm left with b minus 2. On the bottom, I can take out a 3, and I'm left with b plus 5. So remember, I'm just looking at a number that goes into both terms. So there's a number that goes out of both terms. I can divide it out. Next, let's take a look at this 2b plus 18 over b plus 5. So we can actually take out a GCF out of the top one. But I remember I want to change it to multiplying, and I want to flip it. So then this 2b plus 18 is going to go to the bottom. So when I flip it to the bottom, I'm actually going to pull out a GCF of 2. And then on top, we have b plus 5. So let's go ahead and multiply out what we have. Even though there's no parentheses around that one to start off with, we can put them there to represent that we're multiplying. So on the top, I have 6 times b minus 2 times b plus 5. On the bottom, 3 times 2 is 6 times b plus 5 times b plus 9. So now, these are going to cancel out, and also my 6's are going to cancel out. So then I'm left with b minus 2 over b plus 9. That's my simplified version. Let me quick check for my excluded values. Okay, so that 6 isn't going to be equal to 0, but we have to see what's going to happen if b plus 5 is equal to 0 and b plus 9 is equal to 0. So when you solve each of those equations, you get for your excluded value that b cannot be negative 5 or negative 9. Next. Okay, let's take a look at ones where we actually have to do some factoring. So let's take a look at number 3. So number 3, we want to set up that x. So we're multiplying to 2 and adding to 3. So that's going to be 2 and 1. So if you need to go through and write out all the steps for the factoring, please feel free to do that. Remember, I'm not taking as much class time to do that anymore because I'm hoping you guys are kind of starting to get that on your own. So that top one is going to be x plus 2, x plus 1. And now that 4 is going to stay on the bottom. Now I want to take this guy right here and I want to flip it. So I'm going to have x plus 1 on top, and then I'm going to have x plus 2 on the bottom. So now all of that's being multiplied, so we could look at these guys as being in parentheses. So I can cancel out factors that are overlapping. So I'm going to cancel out x plus 2 and x plus 2. So then I'm left with x plus 1 times x plus 1 divided by 4. Don't forget to calculate out your excluded values. So we have this and this on the bottom. Well, 4 is never going to be equal to 0. So all we have to do is check when x plus 2 is going to be equal to 0. And then we get that x cannot be negative 2 for that excluded value. Okay, all I did was solve that for x. So that is, here's your simplified version, and then you want to have your excluded value. Let's take a look at number 4. So this part is a little tricky, factoring this top part. So I'm going to set up the x just so we can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. So we're multiplying to negative 4 and adding to 0. So somehow I want to multiply to negative 4. Well, things that multiply to negative 4, 1 and 4, 2 and 2. Well, if I did a positive 2 and a negative 2, then I could add to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in factored form. I get x plus 2, x minus 2, and that's going to be over 5x. Now I want to take this right here, and because I'm dividing it, I want to flip it and multiply. So on top, I'm going to have an x, and on the bottom, I'm going to have x minus 2. Now everything is being multiplied, so I can put that in parentheses just to remind myself. And I'm going to cancel out things that are overlapping. Well, my x's are going to cancel out. My x minus 2's are going to cancel out. So then on top, I'm left with x plus 2. And on the bottom, I'm left with 5. Okay? So now let's calculate some of those excluded values. So we had x and we had x minus 2 on the bottom. So we have to set both of those equal to 0 to see if we can get our excluded values. So I get that x cannot be 0 and x cannot be 2 when I solve each of those equations. So those are my excluded values. And there's my simplified form. Let's continue on. Okay, so next we want to go ahead and simplify some of these. So again, I'm just going to start factoring. So let's set up the x for the bottom. So we're multiplying to 4 and adding to 4. So the only way we can do that is if we have 2 and 2. So again, if you need to take the time to work out that factoring on your own, that is totally fine. So on the top, we have m plus 3. And on the bottom, we're going to factor that. We have m plus 2 times m plus 2. So that's this trinomial factored. Now, I want to change this into multiplication, so I'm going to flip these two. So on the top is going to come m plus 2. Again, since we're multiplying, I'm just going to tack on some parentheses there to help me recognize that. And then we're going to divide by 2m plus 6. So I'm going to take out a 2. And when I divide both by 2, I'm left with m plus 3. Okay, so now we want to go ahead and find our excluded values. Okay, so let's cancel out what we can. We can cancel out these m plus 2's, and we can cancel out these m plus 3's. Well, everything on top canceled off, so that doesn't mean my top goes away. That means I just have a 1 on top. So then I have 2 times m plus 2. Last but not least, I want to calculate my excluded values. Here's my simplified version. Now for my excluded values, each of those need to be set equal to 0. Well, we don't need to take m plus 2 and set it equal to 0 twice. Okay, so we're just going to do m plus 2 is equal to 0, as well as m plus 3 is equal to 0. So then we get that m is equal to negative 2, and m is equal to negative 3. So our excluded values are that m cannot be negative 2 or negative 3. Next, let's take a look at number 6. So for number 6, parts of it are already factored for us. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is figure out this top one. Well, I'm going to start by taking out a 3. And then I'm left with x squared minus 4. So this part's actually going to take 2 parts of factoring. So now I want to factor this portion right here. So I'm multiplying to negative 4 and adding to 0. So to do that, I need to do 2 and negative 2. Okay, so then I'm going to factor that. So on the top now, I'm going to have 3 times x plus 2 times x minus 2 divided by x minus 6. So then I'm going to multiply it by x plus 4. So I'm switching these around. So on the bottom, I have x minus 6, x minus 2. So now I'm going to go through and cross off what I can. I can cancel off those minus 2's, and that's about it. So then on top, I'm left with 3 times x plus 2 times x plus 4. And then on the bottom, x minus 6 times x minus 6. Why don't you go ahead and calculate the excluded values for that one for me? Next, let's take a look at number 7. So for number 7, we can start by factoring that top. I can take a 2 out of each term, and then I'm left with x plus 2. Okay, then factoring the bottom part, we're multiplying to 18 and adding to 11. That's going to be 9 and 2. So then on the bottom, we're going to have x plus 9 and x plus 2. Now, I'm going to flip this around, and at the same time, I'm going to factor. So then I want to factor this bottom one right here. So I'm multiplying to 6 and adding to 5. That's going to be 2 and 3. So then I get x plus 2, x plus 3 on top, and then on the bottom is x plus 1, and that's because I flipped that fraction. So let's go ahead and cancel out what we can. All right, so I can cancel out an x plus 2, and that's it. So I'm left with 2 times x plus 2 times x plus 3, and on the bottom, I'm left with x plus 9 times x plus 1. Now, I'm not going to require you guys to go through and multiply these out, so this is okay for your final answer. So again, I want you to go through and calculate the excluded values for me. I'm doing most of the work, okay? To save time on number 8, I'm going to write everything out in factored form. So if you're not sure how I factored some of these, go ahead and bring your note sheet up and I'd be more than happy to show you. So on this top part, we're going to have x plus 2, x minus 1 for this one right here. Then for that bottom one, x plus 2, x plus 3. Now we're going to flip those when I multiply. So up here, I'm going to have x plus 3, x plus 4. Ran out of room here. Let me fix that. So now this is fully factored, okay? I factored each of those and I flipped it. So now I want to calculate my overlapping factors here. So I can cancel out these x plus 3s, I can cancel out these x plus 2s, I can cancel out these x minus 1s. And then I'm left with x plus 4 divided by x plus 3. And so that's my final answer. So right now I want you guys to go through and calculate the excluded values for me. Let's take a look at some of these word problems. Okay, so let's take a look at this word problem. It says in April of 2001, NASA launched the Mars Odyssey spacecraft. It took 200 days for the spacecraft to travel 466 million miles from Earth to Mars. What was the average speed of the spacecraft in miles per hour round to the nearest miles per hour? Use rate times time is equal to distance. So our rate, we don't know. Our time was that it took 200 days, and that's equal to our distance, which is 466 million miles. So this is actually just a plug it in and solve it kind of problem. And I bet in the past you didn't realize that when you were doing that, you were actually using rational expressions. So what we're going to do is we're just going to solve this for r. I'm going to divide both sides by 200. And then I end up getting that my rate is equal to 2,330,000 miles per hour. Okay, so that is your rate in miles per hour. And let's take a look at this one. So we need to figure out in July of 2003, so it took from July of 2003 to January 24th or 25th of 2004. So we need to figure out how many days passed when we did that. Okay, so we're going to use the same distance from the previous problem, which was 466 million. And now we need to figure out how many days passed. Okay, so we have 31 days in July, but we started on the 7th. So we had 24 days left in July. Then there's 31 days in August, 30 days in September, and then there's 31 days in October, 30 in November, 31 in December, and 25 in January. So you can go and you can add up all of those days to see how many days it took. And when you add that, you end up getting 201. So then you get that this is equal to 201 times the rate. So I want you to go ahead and solve that for r for me. So then once you're done, go ahead and bring up your completed note sheet and I will give you the homework for the day. Thanks for